Welcome to my channel. In this channel I share some of the battlefields and military museums I have visited in the past. Hopefully you will find it useful for planning your trips if you have similar interests. If you find this content useful or entertaining, please like and subscribe to get alerted when I publish more of such videos. In this video I will give you a tour of the old Ford Factory Museum in Singapore. It was the site of the British surrender to the Japanese on the 15th of February 1942. The museum is a 10 minutes walk from the Hume MRT station and is very accessible. Once you get out of the Hume MRT station, you will see this mural which tells you you're in the right place. Once you get to ground level, walk in this direction. After about 10 minutes of walking you will see this sign. Walk to the gate and enter. This is the museum. It has a very distinct look. The factory was established in October 1941 for the Ford Motor Company, but because of the war, it was taken over and used by the Royal Air Force to assemble fighter aircraft shipped from the US and Britain. These were the earlier Brewster Buffaloes and later the Hawker Hurricanes as well. When you enter the museum, you will see this reception area. Get your tickets to enter the museum. There are also exhibits talking about the Japanese occupation, including one that talks about the Ford factory. Other exhibits talk about Singapore before the war and what Britain's strategy was to defend the island, and more importantly the natural resources like tin, rubber and crude oil from colonies in the region. To understand why Japan invaded, we first have to know about Japan's colonization aspiration for China and the false flag operation to invade Manchuria. Here we see, in chronological order, the key events that led to the invasion of Malaya and eventually Singapore. In 1940 and 1941, Britain was fighting for her life against Germany. Their priorities were defense of the home islands, North Africa because of the Suez Canal, and protecting the convoys between the UK, US and Russia. They knew if Russia fell, Hitler would turn his attention towards invading Britain again. On December 7th, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. An hour later, they simultaneously invaded Hong Kong, the Philippines and Malaya. This was Japanese shock and awe, designed to incapacitate the Western powers. In about 70 days, the Japanese army, under General Yamashita, was able to take over Malaya and most of Singapore. At a table like this, he pushed aggressively for the British surrender to General Percival, the British commander. You can see the recreated scene at the Fort Siloso Surrender Chamber in Sentosa Island. Also at the Fort Canning Bunkers Museum, you can see a recreation of the meeting General Percival had with his staff to decide whether to surrender. Here is the copy of the surrender document. The surrender at Singapore came as a huge shock to the British Empire, as it was named the Gibraltar of the East, Fortress Singapore. To Winston Churchill, it was an unmitigated disaster for the British Empire. To understand how much it was a setback, here is a map of Malaya that is at the Churchill War Rooms at Surmise in London. Malaya was always top of mind for Churchill, even while he was sheltering in the bunker there. Once the Japanese took over, they renamed Singapore to Siananto, or Light of the South. Then came the terror the Kempeitai, or Japanese secret police, inflicted on the population, especially the ethnic Chinese whom the Japanese detested due to the war in China. This operation was known as Suqing, or purification. The museum has multimedia exhibits that show the terror suspected anti-Japanese elements experienced after they are rounded up. Many ended up being shot and buried in mass graves near the coasts. I will do another video covering this at a later date. As for the prisoners of war, the British, Australian and Indian troops, they were marched over to Changi Prison and Selarang Barracks to be interred. I will cover this aspect of the Japanese occupation when I cover the Kranji War Memorial and Changi Chapel Museum in another video. The Japanese also introduced Japanization to the population, renaming buildings and landmarks. Japanese was also taught in schools. Due to the Japanese army hauling away resources and food for the war effort, there was a general struggle to survive. They set up to farms in Malaya, Endau and Bahau, and moved people over to plant their own food to be self-reliant. All paperwork was to be in Japanese. It was a struggle to find work, so people grew their own food and bartered. The Japanese also introduced paper currency that locals called banana money, because the front had a picture of a banana plant. However, they kept printing money to fund their operations. That hyperinflation set in. Here's how much a dozen eggs cost over the time the Japanese were in charge. There are many interactive and multimedia exhibitions in the museum that depict what I've just covered. Finally, on September 2, 1945, the Japanese surrendered and the British returned to Singapore on September 12 to accept the surrender there. There was jubilant celebration, but the myth of invincibility of the British had been shattered. The locals soon demanded for independence. They had suffered enough. War crimes trials were soon conducted, with the Japanese having to answer for their atrocities. However, as they were not a signatory of the Geneva Convention, they had to be tried using the Hague Convention. This ends this video. I'll now leave you all pictures of plants that the locals grew to survive during the Japanese occupation. You can find these in the garden in the museum compound. Please like and subscribe to get more of such videos.